Before we install our AFR Plus system, there are a few things we need to do to prepare. First, you remove the seat by taking these two bolts out, and then you remove the plastic. It pops out here. There's a bolt here, and then this rear piece comes off. We have a bolt here, 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 and here to take the left side plastics off. This will give us better access to the factory oxygen sensor. As you can see in the diagram, our oxygen sensor plug is here, which leads to our factory oxygen sensor in the exhaust flange of the engine. We need to disconnect this, but leave the sensor in place. On the bike here, we have the exhaust flange, the oxygen sensor, and we can follow the wire up to this frame-mounted plug right here. Now we need to disconnect that. Notice that there's a tab here on the bottom. We need to push in on that and pull down. Now this is not easy to do while trying to also run a camera. You might want to tape this connector up and then try and zip tie it out of the way, possibly to one of these hoses or cables. The factory oxygen sensor cable is held in with a little adhesive zip tie, so if you use an end nipper, you can go in there and nip that apart. And now this part of the oxygen sensor actually pops off. So what I would suggest is just taping that, covering it somehow. You could use a vacuum cap or something just to keep it clean in case you ever want to go back. I'm sure you could just take this whole thing out and find a plug to put in there, but I'm going to leave this in there and just cover the end. So this can go in the bin with all the other parts you take off your bike. Something I'm going to do for peace of mind is take a little screwdriver, and there's a tab right there on that oxygen sensor plug. I'm going to push that tab back and remove that plug from that frame tab, and then I'm just going to tape it and zip tie it up here out of the way. Now if we look at this diagram, we can see the pair system, the emission control system. What we need to do now is block off this pair control solenoid system. Right here, that's the top of the engine. If we look in here, you can see right here is where that fresh air is put into the engine, and the pair valve solenoid is right here with this hose clamp on it. So the right side plastic is going to need to come off much the same way that the other side did. And then the reason we need to block that off is we don't want fresh air coming in and going into the exhaust, because that will make it think that it's running very lean. We want to block that off so that only air that went in through the combustion chamber and came out is being read by our AFR system. Okay, now while it is possible to remove the pair system without removing the gas tank, I would suggest removing the gas tank and just setting it back on the seat, because it makes everything in the future a lot easier to deal with. Now, I've already removed the evap canister and everything out of my bike, and I've actually removed this once before, but that was for an aftermarket exhaust. We're doing something completely different this time. So what I'm going to do is remove the tank. Now there's one bolt in here that you got to get from the other side, and then there's one on each side up here that you need to remove, and then you can pick this up, turn it around, and set it back down over top of your air box. I would suggest using a bungee cord or something to hold it down. You don't want that to fall off, and the less gas you have in the tank, the easier this is. You may want to remove the vent line by pinching that clamp and removing it off of this barb. Next, you'll want to push down on this tab and then separate this plug for your fuel tank, and then you should have enough fuel hose line to set it back where the seat goes. One thing about this pair system removal, you don't actually need to remove all of it for this. All you need to do minimally is to take the hose off of this and put a cap on it. What this allows is the fresh air to go into the engine, so you just need to plug this. You do not actually need to remove the solenoid and the hoses and all that. I'm just simply showing how to do that, because once this is unhooked, there's absolutely no reason for this to be on there. Next we'll be removing the hoses from the pair solenoid. So there's one here, if you follow, goes down into the air box, and with this one, when you disconnect it here, you will need to put a vacuum cap on it. You need to plug that somehow, and that's really easy to get to. You just take this bolt out, pull this reservoir out of the way for your rear brake. You can get right at that clamp. I do not currently have a cap for that, so I'll show that later in the video. Now up here, you don't need to take them off of the solenoid valve, but you do need to take it off of the top of your engine here. And these, you can just pinch them with your fingers and move them back. Now, this piece is just a cap, and in between here and the engine, the head cover, there's a gasket and there's a valve, a check valve. I'm going to show you how to make your own block off plate with that. Just wiggle it around a little bit. That comes right off. Guide it around any wires, harnesses, cables that may be in here. Now I do have some extra stuff on my bike that a factory bike will not. This is a coolant temp sensor, which I kind of got in there a little tight. I should move that. And then this wire is for my tachometer, which is wrapped around the spark wire, the spark plug wire, sorry. So that will not be on a factory bike. That's aftermarket stuff I added. Okay, we just move that back out of the way. And then pinch that hose clamp. Again, all this is easier to do with two hands, but I like to inflict the extra pain upon myself of making videos. So, and wiggle that around a little bit. Use two hands, and that hose will come off of your airbox. And remember to plug it. Okay, now to remove the solenoid valve, you see right here we have a single bolt just to the side of these hoses. We got to remove that bolt right there. It also has this little rubber grommet at the top that slips over this piece of metal. Okay, we've got that bolt out, and then we can take the top and just push that off. It does have a little hook on the back side, but then push that over, and then bring that out. This is that, dropped it. This is that rubber piece I was talking about. You see it has this hole in there. It goes over this little lip in this bracket. Okay, now we got one plug on the back here. Again, you just push down on the tab and then pull it off. And this is best done with two hands so you don't break anything in case you ever got to go back. So remove that, and then I'll check in here. I don't think... Yeah, we do not need to replace the bolt that we used to remove all this. Okay, and there's our connector taped up and zip tied out of the way to that that same bracket that it mounted to. Next, we're going to remove this piece here. Now, there is another way you can do this. You can just put a cap over here, but I prefer to put an actual block-off plate on there. So there's a bolt here and there's a bolt here, and we can remove this. I'll go ahead and pop that off. That's the first piece. And then inside here, it's a little hard to get out, but you can see there's this little flapper valve in there, little reed valve. So what I'm going to do is take a pair of needle nose pliers on this screw and just pop it right out and drop it right down into my skid plate. Sweet! Now that you can see down inside there, you see there's a little mesh in there. That also comes out, and that leads directly into the head of the engine, so you want to make sure that you don't drop anything in there accidentally. And that comes out, and now that hole in that top right corner there, that lets fresh air into the exhaust like you saw in the photo in the service manual. So now we need to plug that hole. Okay, now what you can actually do is you can make your own plate to do this. Again, you can just leave all this in and block this. But if you want your own block-off plate, you just take a piece of aluminum, and as you can see, this is one I did quite a while back. Take a piece of aluminum and trace the outside, and then use a transfer punch to transfer the holes, drill the holes. I ran it on some sandpaper on top of something I knew was flat to get it pretty flat. Now I still have to clean this off, obviously. I just scraped all the gunk off of it, but then I'm going to use some gasket maker, or possibly even cut a gasket, and then bolt it right on top of the engine using the bolts that held this piece on. Okay, the reason I haven't worked on this in a few days is because I didn't have any vacuum caps. Now they're also known as bypass caps, and this one's just a 1/2 inch ID, and then I've got a worm gear style clamp on it because the factory one doesn't fit with the smaller cap on there. I'll show you another one without being installed. There you go, it's just a 1/2 inch ID, and I just put a little bit of saliva on it. Makes it slide on easier. You could use like WD-40 or something. Just don't use grease because then it'll be more likely to slip back off. You'll want to use something that'll dry. Next we're going to want to put our block off plate on, and whether you buy one or build one, it doesn't matter, but you're going to want to use a high temp sealant to do this. This is what I got. It's what I used the last time and it worked fine. You don't have to get the copper stuff. This is 650 degrees intermittent. The copper is only good for just a little bit more. But whatever you want to get, as long as it's high temp, it should work. So we're just going to put a little bead all the way around here, and then we'll put either this on, or one you bought, or if you want to just get another vacuum cap and put it on, you can also do that to the factory reed valve setup. That same 1/2 inch bypass or vacuum cap will also fit on this piece if you wanted to do it that way. Alright, we've got our thin layer on there, and this is true with any gasket, but make sure you go inside of the bolt and not all the way around the outside edge, because it's possible that pressure could get into where that bolt is and then come out. So you want to be on the inside of the bolt on both sides there. So then we'll go ahead, put this on, and put the bolts on it, and I just go by feel, but I will look up the torque spec for that. Okay, right here at the bottom of this chart here, pair check valve cover bolt. There are 2 of them. They are a 5mm, and that is 3.8 pound-feet. That's also the same torque spec for all bolts in general for that size for this bike, and that's right out of the Honda service manual. So that was removing the pair system, putting the plate on in its place, and disconnecting the oxygen sensor. Now, another thing some people do with these bikes is they remove the evap canister, which recirculates fumes out of the gas tank back into the engine. I removed it on mine. Again, this is all up to you and your local laws, but I've got a separate video way back on my channel for that. Now that we're done with the prep for the AFR Plus, we can bolt our brake reservoir back on because we won't be back there again, but I would suggest leaving the tank off because we're going to need to be in here with the fuel injector and running cables and that sort of thing. So the AFR install will be in the next episode, and then probably the episode after that we will be putting the oxygen sensor bung in the exhaust here. So make sure you're subscribed. We'll keep working on this. This is a last minute note. It does not throw an engine fault code when the oxygen sensor is unplugged. One last thing for this video. You don't have to remove your fuel tank, but if you do, it'll be a little bit easier running wires and stuff. You pull this rubber retainer out, and then these 2 white tabs, you pinch those together, and then you can pull this off, but you are going to get gas on stuff, so just be aware, make sure nothing's hot, that sort of thing. They do suggest you put a new locking pawl, or whatever you want to call this, retaining clip in when you put this back together. I've reused this one once before though, and it was fine. So don't have to, but you can. It'll make your life a little easier.